morning, everyone. Welcome to the Aurum podcast, where we discuss all things related to building winning teams. I'm your host. My name is Tony Kuri, and I'm so glad that you could join with us today. The Aurum podcast is hosted by Aurum Consultants, a human resource and risk advisory consultancy based here in Nairobi, Kenya. And we are glad that you could be able to join with us today, wherever you are across the world. With me today is Zipporah Kuria, the MD of Aurum Consultants. Welcome, Zippy.
Thank you, Anthony. Good morning, viewers. Good afternoon, good evening. I'm glad to be here and looking forward to an interactive conversation.
All right, awesome. And also with us is a human resource manager, a senior manager here at Aurum Consultants. Her name is Kendi Mugambi. Welcome, Kendi, to today's podcast.
Thank you, Tony. Good morning, viewers. I'm glad to be here and also, like Zipporah, looking to a very interactive podcast. And karibuni sana.
Thank you, Kendi. Thank you, Kendi. And finally, as always, the consultant of consultants, the one who stands with us even as we do our HR, our discussions here with the HR topics, Madam Martha Tuku, a HR specialist. Welcome, Martha.
Thanks so much, Anthony. And good morning, viewers. Welcome to our podcast today. Please let's have an interactive podcast. Thank you.
Indeed, indeed, Martha, you have nailed it. Let's have an interactive podcast. We want today to discuss issues regarding contracts. This month we've been discussing contracts, contracts specifically as relates to the workplace. And specifically today we want to discuss type of employment contracts. And therefore, if you're listening in, as we continue discussing, you have a question, you have a thought, you want to understand something better, kindly send your comments. We are live on Facebook and on YouTube. Kindly send in your comments as we continue. Now, when it comes to employment contracts, it can be a complex and confusing experience when you're trying to navigate employee contracts, but it's important for you to understand them in order to have a settled workplace. Now, ensuring a smooth onboarding and strong team relationships by learning different contract types is what we are discussing today. So, would love you to tune in and keep tuning in as we continue with this discussion. Now, let me go to the first place where I'm sure if somebody is listening to us and either they are, it could be a HR expert or they could be wondering, okay, we are discussing employment contracts. I've heard that stuff. So what exactly is it? So let me start, Madam Zippy. Let's get the ball rolling by finding out what constitutes an employment contract.
Thank you, Anthony. Just before I talk about what constitutes an employment contract, allow me to just help us remember, because we've been talking about this conversation the last couple of weeks on employment contracts, and just to remind us what contracts are all about. And an employment contract is a legal document or written or oral between an employer and an employee, or between two parties, that defines a working relationship. And of course, this is a document that should outline the roles, the responsibility, things like payments, things like benefits, things like rights for both parties. What are the expectations? It's important for us to understand an employment contract is a legally binding agreement. And this is something that all of us need to understand, whether it's actually in writing or in oral, because in my work experience, I've seen situations where, an employee would wonder, why should I give a written contract? Why should I even get myself involved in all this? And sometimes we think when we don't have a written contract, then we don't have a legally binding agreement. And it's important for us to understand the law does acknowledge both written and oral contracts, and the law applies to both of them. So the law would apply to you on an oral contract as though as you had a written contract. So it serves you better to have that document. And when you're giving a contract, there are many expectations. Just to come back to your question about what constitutes a contract of employment, there are many expectations between the employee, between the employer, and these expectations, it's important for them to be reduced into writing. It's important for us to understand what is expected, and this is now what we say is a written contract. You put it down in paper, it outlines all the issues that come into the contract, and probably we'll cover this when we talk about the particulars of a contract. But it's important for us to actually put the expectations of both parties in writing. But when we're looking at employment contract, we are not just looking at that document you've written and it's an employment contract. You're looking at many other documents that constitute the total employment contract. You're looking at things like job descriptions. Again, another area that a lot of times I see, as HRs or as CEOs, we are not too keen to give employees contracts. We are not too keen to give them the KPIs, and these are part of the things that constitute an employment contract. We don't give our employees policies. Policies are part of the employment contract. Things like HR manuals, memos, circulars that we would give every now and then, advising employees of something that needs to be taken into consideration during their work period. Things like CBS for those who have a union in place. All these things constitute what we say is part of the total employment agreement or employment contract. Why? Because it's not just a written document that is the contract, but there are many other documents that relate to that relationship, and we need to have that in consideration. When we are drafting our contracts, it's important for us to actually have a clause that states there are many other documents and what those documents refer to and where employees can find those documents that would form the total employment agreement. And of course, you need to do your part as an employer. You need to remove any doubts of your employees' expectations, and especially where performance is concerned. I have seen situations where we've engaged an employee after 3 months. We already saying this employee is not performing, but when you go back, you realize the process that was used to engage the employee was not clear. They were not given any contract. They were not given any job description. They were not given any KPIs. So there's no clarity. It's all gray. Then we come back and accuse them they are not performing. So the question becomes, what are we basing that argument on? Is there something that we have given them that makes them understand the expectations? So you need to ensure that all needed documentation is shared with the staff, and they are regularly trained. So don't just give the documents and assume they have read it. Make it your responsibility. Make sure that these employees are trained. Make sure they understand. When we are talking about JDs, when we are talking about KPIs, what do they mean? What do I need to do as an employee from an individual level to fulfill my responsibilities? So I think if we start doing some of these things as employers, then we will start removing the notion of, we are getting people who are non-performers. Because when I'm saying you're a non-performer, then I need to have done my part as an employer 100% in providing you with the skills, in providing you with the tools, in providing you with expectations, so that by the time I come and say this relationship is not working because you're not performing, clearly all of us were on the same page and we understood each other. So I think just to open us up, I think that's what I would say in terms of what would constitute an employment contract. I would allow
Okay.
my to give their input as well.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. Zippy, thank you for that comprehensive opening statement. Yeah, it's very comprehensive. It's both comprehensive and in brief. And indeed, that sets us up, running. Let me ask Madam Martha, having been experienced, having done this for a long while now, I'm sure you have been at both ends of the spectrum of what CP was describing. So, Martha, tell us, from your perspective, how do you say what would constitute a contract of employment?
Indeed, I can't agree with Zippy more. She has actually clearly outlined what constitutes of an employment contract. So the most important thing we have had, and Zippy has said clearly, it's important to know that the contract is a legal binding agreement between the employer and the employee. So what constitutes is that legal document is used to define the working relationship between the employer and the employee. So the basics is outlining the employee's role and responsibilities, uh, and then you will add also like things regarding to their compensation benefits that are within that employment relationship. But then now, as Zippy has said, you go further and ensure, by the way, you need to ensure that there's a clause
Mm,
regarding areas of employment contract or human resource handbook that the employee is expected to read. And
mm,
NZP has said, once you issue that, then it's good to go ahead and even offer training, maybe not per se on the employment contract, but other areas that you have not clearly outlined, so that there's no haziness in the relationship. Issues to do with probation, what happens if the probation is unsuccessful, all those issues needs to be there. um, the issues to do with termination during probation, or should I want to disengage from this relationship, or the employer needed to disengage. What exactly does that mean? Mostly you find you need to give 30 days notice, either party, or you use the employee. If they want to disengage and they don't want to give 30 days, then they can forfeit their salary. The employer, if they want to disengage, they can give you 30 days in lieu of notice. You need to make sure that every clause is very clear on that relationship. So let it not be hazy, and let that contract be there, because when it's not there, or where things are hazy, you can find yourself in bad times, especially if the employee is dissatisfied during termination. And we have said, I think is in previous podcasts when we were talking about litigation, and we said clearly, the labor court never looks at what the employee did. It looks at the process that you took
mm.
to terminate the employee. And that process entails those documents. It entails a clear written contract, and highlighting all those things. So you must make sure that you have them in place, because it secures you, and then B, it also makes the employee understand the kind of relationship you have. That's what I have to input. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Martha. Thank you indeed. If you're a listener and you're listening to us and you're, absorbing, as I said, ask the questions. We are here to discuss them. Madam Kendi, you are on the ground, as they say. Sasa sijui, I don't know whether things on the ground are different from the theoretical foundations that we've been given by Zippy and Martha. What's your take in your experience on a day to day? I'm sure you're always, writing contracts for new staff, hiring, or you probably went, as a HR consultant with Aurum, you've gone to a company where there are already employees, and you're finding whether or not they have contracts. From your perspective, what's your take regarding what constitutes a contract for employment?
Thank you, Tony. I couldn't agree more with my colleagues in regarding what needs to be clear in the contracts when you're drafting contracts for your employees. As the conversation has been going for the last 2 weeks of this month, it is important that we clearly state what are the expectations in a contract, which is of benefit to both the employer as well as the employee. You need to state whether it's the length of the contract, whether it's a full a permanent contract or a fixed term contract. If it's a fixed term contract, you need to state the length. If it's a 1 year, you need to state from the period it starts and to the period, the last day that it ends. You also need to clearly explain the benefits to the employee in the contract in terms of the payments and the working hours. And you need, as much as you're not training the employee on the contract, you need to sit with them and make sure that they understand the contents on the contract, because sometimes as we on ground we work with we find yourself working with employees who are not have not gone to school, and you need to ensure that they clearly understand what they are getting into when they are signing a contract. So you need also to explain, in case of a dispute, how do you resolve this dispute? You need to make sure the employee understands the procedure. Despite having a policy outside the contract, how do you carry yourselves in terms when there's a dispute between the employer and the employee? So, like my colleagues have said, there is more to just not just drafting a contract, but making sure that all the terms are clear. Is it the retirement age? Is it uh, time off? Is it explained clearly in your contract, or do you just say there's a leave policy regarding to that, or are you in line with the Employment Act? So on ground, as we are speaking here, it's the same thing that should be happening for our employees. And also as employees, you need to ensure that you understand what you're getting yourself into when you're signing a contract. And if you don't understand what is going on, you need to ask the questions before getting into that binding contract, like we have said. That's my take.
Anthony, just allow me to say something. I don't know whether we've lost Anthony, but just to pick
I'm
on
right here.
what India said, and especially on the other side of employees, because a lot of times I think we always think it's the employer who should do, should do, or should do. And as employees, we think we have no responsibility. You're getting yourself into a binding contract with someone else. It's also your responsibility to ask what is expectation. It's your responsibility to understand what is expected of me, so that you are also not playing ignorance. You know, when along the line you are not performing and you say, I did not know what was expected. I don't know, Mother, from your experience, whether you have this, but I remember at one time, we are dealing with the union. And one of the things that I found very interesting is where we will be challenged, where as employees signed, do they understand this? And some of these things, they are games we play. But on the other hand, as an employee, you are being paid a salary every month. Can you justify why you're being paid? And I think we need to move from the era of, it's about me as an employee, because the employer is also expecting results. The employer is expecting you to give them their fair share of what they are expecting of you. So it's your responsibility to also understand, what does this contract mean? What is expected of me? Do I understand my JD? Do I understand the KPIs? Do I understand the processes? And if I don't understand, then what should I be doing? So employees also need to be empowered, and they also need to take that responsibility of being more involved and wanting to know, rather than taking a back seat and saying, I was not told and it's not my responsibility. So I think all of us need to come to the table with a very clear mind of what we should be doing and what is the expectation of one another. It's important, and I think I've said this before, it's important for also employees to understand the employer actually also has rights. And if you look at the Employment Act, it actually stipulates the same. The employer has rights in response to this contractual agreement. So it's not a one-sided kind of an agreement, it's a two-sided agreement, and both of us need to fulfill our responsibilities. So as we encourage employers to fulfill their responsibility, employees also need to understand they need to fulfill their responsibility. And I think that's very important for us to also note.
Indeed,
Awesome.
Zippy, let me
True.
add for you. And so that particular responsibility is so important. So it is not good for you, employer, to issue a contract based on a JD. It's a relationship. So you can't issue me with a contract and expect me to come in and hit the ground running and expect me to perform, and then within 3 months you want to send me home because you think I'm not performing. A case scenario I would give is I worked where we had this very big role of a senior director, and the only person who actually seemed to understand what that person was coming to do was the executive director. So, but we did interviews, and this guy really, he's a very top guy in this country. He's someone you see in the news. You could see he understands what he's doing, he's supposed to do, but he came in and the people who are supervising him, because now the executive director is not there day to day. He didn't take him through the people and where to start and all. He was expecting the number two to run with this guy. But the number two never understood this role. So the guy was just there. And I remember when I was introducing coaching in that organization, and in the coaching briefing, there in the coaching class, there is a time where you are supposed to just be two of you and discuss your challenges in employment. Like you coach someone how they can come out of something. So I was partnered with this guy, and that's when I learned for the last 6 months since he came in, and we confirmed him by the but he had not gelled. He didn't know what he's supposed to do. He's not getting support. And I wondered, you never reached out to me. but it hit me. So the organization has given you work, but whose responsibility is it to perform, to ensure that this role and the pay you're like him, he was getting a lot of money, that he's meeting that obligation and earning that money. So he started saying how, he doesn't have support, he doesn't have support. So I saw what had transpired, and so for coaching, you don't tell someone what to do. You ask them questions so that you help them kind of come up with their own answers to make them perform. And I asked them, so when this happened, what else could you have done? What else? And what else? And what else? And for some reason, that's when I learned that coaching is really important, is that he was able to come up and decide exactly what he should have done and going forth what he's going to do. And then we had plans on feedback every two weeks of the person you are coaching with. And I'm telling you, after 2 weeks, he had already established his role. He had connected with the people he needed to connect with and relieved himself from the executive director. Once you become so attached to the big person, everyone else fears you. But he now needed to contact with the people on the ground. He had changed one of our offices that was way out in the field. He had changed because his work was on strengthening systems, and he had changed everything in that county just because of working with the people on the ground. So your responsibility as an employee, it's not just ending at you signing the contract. It's when you come in, you make sure you fit in and you work with the people you are with to ensure that you fulfill those terms of that contract, so that even when your employer is paying you, when you're getting the money, you're going home satisfied that really I have earned this money. So I just wanted to give that feedback when ZP said even the employee has a responsibility. So the employer gives you the contract, they have given you the tools of trade, but it is your responsibility to ensure that you perform based on the terms and conditions that you have already signed for. Thank you.
Wow.
Allow me to add, Tony, before you, like Mother said, being on ground, that happens a lot. You get like we are consultants, you're coming in into an organization that has never had an HR department, and you're interacting with these employees, getting to know what they do, and you've probably been told this employee has not been performing. We've had him for 1 year, and he's not. We've not seen any changes in what he was supposed to do. But when you're talking to this employee, they will say that I was just brought here. I was told this is your workstation. You're supposed to hit the ground running. You don't understand what is going on, what you're supposed to do, what's your job description. There's a lot of that going on. But like Zippy has said, it is your responsibility, even as you've been given your desk to do the job. Why don't you ask the questions? What am I supposed to be doing here? Rather than just sitting down and waiting for your employer to come and tell you what to do, it is your responsibility to ask the questions. It is, where is my JD? You've given me the tools. What am I supposed to do? Because at the end of the day, you're getting paid to do a job, and if you don't do the job, you're robbing the company as well, because you're being paid for not doing what you're supposed to be doing, because you're claiming you don't know what to do.
Indeed, indeed, indeed. This conversation is starting to get hot. Indeed, if you're out there, you're a businessman or businesswoman, you're an entrepreneur, you're running your business, you're an employee, high executive, employed, whatever status you are, this is where you need to be. This conversation is really getting on. I can see. I had 3 pointers to talk about, but point number one has taken about 25 minutes to show you how important this is. And if you're out there, as I said earlier, if you have a question, if you have a pointer, you guys agree with what you've just said, some of the pointers have been brought in, feel free to drop in your comments in the comment section. We are live on Facebook and YouTube. Kindly throw in the questions, throw in the comments. We would love to sample them as we continue. Now, we have discussed what the employer needs, what's the right of the employer in a sense. We have discussed what's the rights of the employees, just very briefly, and what responsibilities these two parties play in. But now, the question that logically comes in is, okay, are there different types of contracts? Are there different types of contracts? Zippy, let me start with you. Now that you're shifting, we have known that a contract, whether written or unwritten, constitutes a legally binding relationship enforceable by law. So the question is, because we know people work differently and all that, what, in a nutshell, what are the types of employment contracts?
Thank you, Anthony. Let me start by saying we have two key types of contracts. One is oral contracts, and the other one is written contracts. Like I said earlier, it's important for us to be aware that oral contracts constitute a binding legal engagement with any employee, and that is actually enshrined in the Employment Act 2007. However, allow me to dwell a bit on the written contracts, because with oral contracts, if you don't have written contracts, it's oral contracts, it's a gentleman's agreement. The truth is, when there's a disagreement between you and the employee, then the law will take its course. And as an employer, I can guarantee you it will work against you. So it serves you better to have a written contract with your employees. Now, when we come to written contracts, these can be subcategorized in various ways. And one of them is permanent contracts or open contracts, where you find a contract has no definite end. And this contract is likely to go all the way to retirement age, unless terminated because of other reasons, like maybe medical retirement, or maybe a resignation or a disciplinary issue. We've seen this a lot previously in the government, but again, with time, we have started seeing the issue of permanent contracts reducing because of the challenges that come with running businesses. And the government, I think, has also realized probably sometimes it's not always the best way to approach. I've seen them move to, what do you call them? The performance-based contracts. And again, this means probably they are not giving some of the employees permanent contracts. Some of them might have permanent contracts, but others are on performance-based contract. And just talking about performance-based contract again, this is a contract where it's specifically based on your performance or performance of a particular project. So again, the details of that contract are very clear. Again, as an employer, if you're going to get into performance-based contracts, you must be very thorough, you must be very clear of the expectations, you must be very clear about the evaluation process, and this process has to be quite thorough and very fair, and the employee must understand this before they get into it. But this is a contract that can bring a lot of legal challenges because of misunderstanding, or because as an employee, I feel I performed, on the other hand, you feel I did not perform. The other contract I would probably talk about would be a probationary contract. Again, we've seen situations where an employer gives an employee a probationary contract for their probation period, and this is normally a period where you allow the employee to just settle in, understand the culture of the business, get to fit in with the values, and get to start performing. And this is a time where both of us are evaluating each other. As an employee, you're evaluating me as an employer to see, do you really want to continue working here? As an employer, I'm also evaluating to see, is this the kind of an employee we think they will be able to serve the purpose of this responsibility? So there's quite a number of contracts when it comes to written contracts, and I will allow my colleagues to give in their input on that as well.
Indeed, Zippy. Thank you for giving us that clarity, that foundation. Martha, again, your experience really counts in here. What's your take regarding the types of contracts that are normally offered?
Yeah, so as Zippy has said about the oral and written, in the old days, those let me call them permanent and pensionable, like we had in the bank.
Yes,
So you and the desk in the
yes.
organization, you're tight. But so you find that as the world moves, we are moving to the fixed term contract. So I don't want to repeat what ZP has said, because that is actually the types of contracts we have. I just wanted to talk about these fixed term contracts that now most organizations are moving into. You'll find that most organizations are moving to annual contracts. So I just wanted to give a bit of a danger in the fixed term contract. So when I say fixed term contract, it means it's a contract starting from this date, ending this date. Zippy has talked about probationary contracts. My advice would be not to issue a contract, calling it probationary contract. I would rather call it a fixed term. So I can issue a 3-month fixed term contract. Because what we have realized now, the labor law is very cautious about this probationary thing. Because also we have realized employers use the probation period to get rid of staff. And so if you take your staff to court because of the probation period, I'm not sure you're going to win that case. Because now they're keenly looking at why you are disengaging with that person, unless you have documentation of performance improvement, whatever the reason is. You can't just now release someone the way we would just issue a letter that we are not compatible, you go. So for me, I would say I would rather issue a 3-month fixed contract. And if I can use that period to assess you and then issue the full-time contract. So I wanted to talk about the fixed-term contract, and I wanted to give an example of another former employer I had, and we were issuing these fixed-term contracts, but we kept on using a word called renewable. And because of renewable, and when you work in an NGO, it's donor funded, meaning everything is based on the funding.
Yes.
So if the funding, there's either funding cuts or donor has withdrawn the funding, that means you don't have money to pay those people. But you can't say now, let's wait for the contract end and then you release people. Where you have put the word renewable. So some of these things we learn as we work. So because of that word renewable, when we consulted with the lawyer, we found that because of that particular word, we had to we released the staff. When the staff were released, they had to be paid. Zippy, what is that called? Is it
Severance or service?
severance?
Severance
And
pay.
purely because of the word renewable. Because there is an expectation that even as this contractor, the word renewable says there's an expectation of renew, and the organization paid so much because there were over like 45 people who are going, and it's in that I learned to remove that word renewable, so that we know that Candy, you're employed from January to December. You know it, and I know it, and unless, and it's good to put some clauses, unless unless further funding, if you will not, this contract will not be renewed. So you have to put things that will ensure that that person know I'm employed for this particular period. If it's 3 months, this particular period. So that's what I wanted to add, because I didn't want to repeat what CP said, because those are the types of employment contracts we have. Thank you very much.
Sorry, Tony, just allow me to say something to just add on to what Mother said, because I've had an experience with dealing with this kind of contracts where you give fixed term contracts, and that expectation of a renewal of a contract has become such a big challenge for employers. So you must be very clear on the wording of your contracts, because this is again an area that is very uh, um, is very tricky, and most employers don't understand this. Sometimes you'll find we'll give a very basic contract, but when you look at the wording, this contract works against you as an employer. So I always advocate for, please get a professional to help you look at the wording of your contract, because if that wording has clauses of words that can be used against you, then you need to be aware of those areas, so that again you don't start having litigations that you're actually wondering where they're coming from, yet as an employer you have done the best. When you look at the NGO world where funding is concerned, that issue of a promise of to renew the contract is very risky, because if funding, like Mother has said, does not come, then you are actually forced to terminate that contract. So if you had actually put in your contract that is a renewable contract, what have you done? You are actually declaring this person redundant, and that can become a big challenge. So I think the wording, what I need to stress on is the wording of your contract need to be very precise and very clear, so that again you don't get yourself in challenges.
But then also, ZP, we also noticed that you find, even if you have not used those words renewable and all, but you have renewed the contract 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, then now that also is still a promise that the employee is expecting. So the labor court works there's a thin line, but you are safer when you have just done the fixed term. Even if you renew it, you're safer. But I can tell you, if you renew it 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, actually you find like the labor court is thinking that is a permanent job.
Yeah.
So there is also those implied consequences, just because of you have renewed. Someone can be in your organization for 10 years with 1 year contract. It's very important that now you are considering them as permanent employees. Even if they are in 1 year, you can't just wake up one day and release them, because of in that year, that's when the funding has gone, yet they have been with you for all these years. You must make sure that now terminal benefits will come in should you terminate that person. Thank you.
All right. Indeed, this, as I said, this is getting interesting. Candy, you're on the ground day to day. Give us your input regarding your view on the types of contracts.
Thank you, Tony. I would like to talk on the fixed term contract that Martha has said just now. It's when you're giving the term the period of the contract, you need also to consider the industry that you're in, because being the person on ground, we get being, let's say you're in the service industry, you can't have employees coming in and out every short period, because of the familiarity also with the guest and how you're serving the guest. So you need to consider that as well, and also consider what's the take in case you're giving an employee a contract for 3 months. How do you expect them to perform, knowing that their contract will be renewed, will might not be renewed? So also be considerate when you're giving the contract period, depending on the industry that you are in. I'd also want to add on one more contract type of contract. We have, like in the entertainment industry, we have employees who come in when there's like an event, let's say an event, or there's a booking that is there. That's when you call them. That is like they're not fully an employee of the organization. There is just a 0 hour contract where they just come in when they need to be there, and that's called I don't think it's used as much in the country, but it's a 0 hour based on the industry. And also we have casual contracts. These are people who just come in when there's a project. They only are there when during the project period for a period of, let's say, 1 week, 2 weeks, and that comes to an end, and it's not renewable. They only called when there's need for that. Yes, that's my take. And as well as now being ensuring that the written contracts are clear on what the terms are. You need to ensure that is there and it's clearly explained that if, like Mother has said, it's from this date to this day, make sure it says that on the last day of this contract, it expires automatically unless renewed in right, not renewed unless it's unless there's a verb or a written agreement to renew the same on a period of like it explained, it's 1 year, 2 years, or 5 years.
Thank you, Candy. Thank you for that. Indeed, ladies, we are having a conversation that is bringing in lots of comments, and we appreciate the comment coming from Mary Omega. She says, "Great insights. I'm learning a lot." Indeed, Mary, this conversation is really interesting. Especially if you're running your own business, if you're an employee, even this is really bringing in a lot of insights. Now, ladies, our time is really gone. I've already surpassed the time that you're supposed to be doing it. We normally do it within 35 minutes or so. So I had two more discussion points. Looks like we might need to extend this conversation to next week. I don't know what you think, ladies. Yes, indeed, we might have to continue this discussion next week. And a few questions like, does an employer have to issue, or is it necessary for an employer to issue an employment contract? I also had another topic which I thought the audience would want to think about is what considerations should I have as an employer before I issue a contract? Now, those are things I had hoped to discuss today. But as usual, I underestimated the meatiness, the substance within what we discuss. And indeed, those we will be continue with this discussion of types of employment contract next week. We will further these conversations next week. And to you, our listeners and our viewers, we want to continue encouraging you to come in. Thank you, Meshak Ochwando, for your comment. Thank you for that very affirmative comment. We appreciate it. So, if you're listening to us and you'd like to know more, you're probably running your business and you're thinking, you know what, guys, I am in trouble. From what you guys have said, I'm exposed badly in running my business. I'm exposed because my contracts are all over the place. I don't even know whether I've issued contracts or I'm running it, but I had a nasty experience with an employee, or something went wrong. Like now, what Martha was describing. One word, one word caused a company to pay 45 employees a lot of money, severance pay, just because of one clause. So you might be there and you're wondering, wow, what do I do? I've been caught my pants down, figuratively, and you need your support. So kindly reach out to us via the contacts at the bottom of your screen. You can reach to us by phone, by email, through our website. You can reach to us, through our social media handles. You can get in touch with us via Facebook, via YouTube, via LinkedIn. Get in touch with us. We can help you if you need support for your contracts. We can also help you to do a proper HR audit and advise you where your risks are, especially where employment employee contracts are involved. So having said that, I want to appreciate you, Martha. Candy, thank you for coming in to join us today. Zippy, thank you for your time. To those who are handling us behind the scenes, our technical support, Mr. Chris Kimoto, thank you very much for your work. And to you, our viewer and our listener, we want to appreciate you. Thank you for taking your Saturday morning out to come and listen to us and prepare yourself. So, having said that, see you next week. We'll continue discussing about employment contracts. Make sure you log in on time. We'll have a sumptuous discussion going on. Having said that, God bless you. See you next week.